The ultimate resource in economic development is people. It is people, not capital or raw materials, that develop an economy. Peter Drucker.
Was I afraid? Not really. I think when you're young, sometimes you're just too dumb to be afraid. For me, it was more James Bondish, exciting. Everything that was happening was exciting. The officer that I replaced was shot in the middle of his forehead by the North Vietnamese. You would think that would give people pause to say, I don't think I want to do this. But it didn't. It just made me think, I really need to do more to help the Hmong. I was there to serve them, to work with them and work for them. And that was my focus rather than anything about my person. And so whether I was out in a village, walking between villages in what might have been contested area or whatever it was, I don't think I felt any real fear. I felt more excitement.
It took me about 2 minutes to realize that Paul E. White's stories could not be contained in a single episode. In fact, this is the first of a 2-part episode in which neither progresses past his very first assignments in Laos in the 1960s. From there, he went on to become a legend in the USAID ranks, and it's easy to see why. In this episode, we meet Paul as a brand new International Voluntary Services teacher. And in the next, his transition to becoming a refugee relief and rehabilitation officer with USAID. The job titles changed, but the stories are equally unforgettable. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful. Stories.
I was born and actually grew up in Brazil. Not the South America Brazil with sun-drenched beaches and samba. I was born in the USA small town Brazil with cornfields and coal dust in the great state of Indiana. Brazil was just a tiny speck of a town. It was rural, it was monochrome. And by that I mean it was maybe 97% white and 3% black. That made things interesting. There was diversity in Brazil, but the diversity was more like, should I pick a blue Ford pickup truck or a green John Deere farm tractor? I lived sort of in between worlds because I was a twist on that narrative. I was half black, half Native American. I didn't quite fit so comfortably in the black community and not in the majority white community either. I lived in a kind of lonely world that was apart from all of that. It was difficult. I was sort of in the cross currents of identity, trying to figure out who I was and how I fit into everything. But there was also some good in that because I became a really astute observer of people. I learned to read people like a book. I could even read the nuance of unspoken words in between lines. And all of that eventually grew into, I think, a virtue that I have, an ability to listen carefully and to maybe see beneath the surface and to do that with feeling. Some people call that empathy. My father was a self-made man. He grew up in the Deep South, born in 1890, so there were no schools for him in Kentucky, where he was born, in a small mining town. He worked in the mine when other white kids were in school. But he had a really lucky incident. There was a mine explosion and he broke his back. And as they were carrying him out, his father said to him, his father had also worked in the mines, he said, "Son, that's the best thing that ever happened to you." And what he meant was that he could no longer work with his brute strength, that he had to find some other way to make a living. He was lucky. He found a German piano tuner in a little piano store there in the Kentucky town. He was just working in the store, but he would listen to the guy when he was tuning pianos. And one time when the guy was out sick, he tuned all of the new pianos that came in. When the piano tuner came back, he was amazed that the pianos were in tune. And he said to the store owner, "How did this happen? Did they send them tuned this way?" The man said, "No, they came just the way they always did." So the piano tuner looked at my dad and understood what had happened. When the store owner left, he said to my dad, "I'll give you some piano tuning tools, but you need to get out of this town. There's not room for 2 piano tuners in this town." So my dad established his own business, and it was very successful in Brazil. My dad didn't have any education. My mother had only 2 years of primary school. They wanted me to get an education. On the living room table, there was a dictionary, there was a Bible, and there were books everywhere. And my mother encouraged me to read and study and work hard in school, and I did. I was a really excellent student in school. People sometimes say, "Well, how did you ever get out of that rural Brazil and become an international person?" I think there are a number of different influences that pushed me along. The first that I remember is my 2nd grade music class. Mrs. Watts was the teacher. Her piano was the portal, and her melodies were the guide. Sweet Molly Malone, singing "Cockles and Mussels Alive, Alive, Oh," would take me to the cobblestone streets of Dublin. And Danny Boy, I would bound from glen to glen and down mountainsides that I had never seen but somehow felt a little familiar. I would sing "O Solo Mio" in the canals of Venice. So Mrs. Watts, in her music class, handed me my first passport. Maybe next, I discovered in the basement of my own home my mother's National Geographic collection. Those yellow-covered books were like magic carpets. They would take me away from those cornfields to really magic places, like the stone-silent sentinels on Easter Island, or a shimmering in the mist Buddhist temple in Bhutan, or Machu Picchu rising in the Andes like some kind of ancient but also familiar dream. A third influence I found in the Carnegie Library in Brazil. Way back in the back stacks, I found a book with a gray, really unassuming cover. Emblazoned on the title was Japan in bright, bold red letters. It was a story about Lafcadio Hearn, about his life in Matsui in the 1890s, I think. His writing captivated me. It was exotic, it was tender, and it had a melancholy that really made me feel that Japan was not just a place somewhere, but it was a feeling that was attached to me, that I belonged to it, that I might fit in Japan. So those were all influences when I was a child. So at some point, the decision had to be made: should I go to college or should I take over my dad's business? So I started by working with my dad as an apprentice. I spent the first year after high school being a piano tuner's assistant. But that really wasn't working for me. So then I went to college. And then in college, there was the mother of all influences. There was a young senator running for president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He gave a speech at the University of Michigan, a campaign speech, where he challenged the youth of my generation. He said that we, with American dollars, with American know-how, and with American goodwill, could change the world for the better. Those words stuck with me, and they perhaps helped define the path that I eventually would follow. As I mentioned, I'd become a Nipponophile. I loved Japan. I had Japanese pen pals. And talking to the dean of the school when I was about to graduate the final year, he said, "What are you planning to do?" I said, "I'm going to go back to Brazil and take over my dad's business." And he said, "But you're a brilliant student. You should really consider graduate school." And in the course of that conversation, the dean said, "What are your hobbies? What interests you?" And I said, "Japan. Japan has had a hold on me since I was in junior high school." He said, "I'm a Japanophile. He said, I go to Japan 2 months every summer. I can help you if you want to go to graduate school." He said, "There's a graduate fellowship sponsored by the U.S. Congress at the East-West Center, University of Hawaii. I will write you a letter of recommendation." And that sent me off on a totally different direction. Piano tuning then faded away very quickly. On that scholarship, I had the opportunity to travel to Japan, and I went beyond Japan to Southeast Asia. During my time in Japan, I found that Lafcadio Hearn's Japan I couldn't find it. It wasn't there. Japan was modern and industrial and booming, and I didn't fit in Japan. I didn't feel comfortable there. But in Southeast Asia, in the mountains of Thailand, I visited some refugee villages populated by the Mao. They were called Mao at that time. Now they're called Hmong. Immediately, I felt an attachment to them. I felt that I fit in that culture. Part of it was that they were animists, and they believed that every living thing, plants and animals, have a spirit, but also inanimate objects like rocks or rain or rivers or rainbows. Everything has a spirit. And that was the teaching that I had learned from my mother, who was Native American. And that really bonded me with the Hmong. So after graduate school, I was looking for some way to get to Southeast Asia to work with the Hmong. I went to the State Department, to DOD, to the CIA. I knocked on everybody's door and I wasn't having any luck. One day I saw walking down the street a guy in an aloha shirt. It was Jack Parmenter, who had been a classmate of mine at the University of Hawaii. I said, "Jack, what are you doing here in Washington, D.C.? "I'm joining International Voluntary Services. I'm going to Laos." I said, "I would love to go to Laos." And he said, "There's a place. One of the guys just dropped out. Why don't you go with me to the IVS office and see if they will be interested in hiring you to be a school teacher in Siang Gwang province?" So I went. They were interested. I applied and I was accepted. And that took me to Laos and started my relationship with the Hmong. Just hard to believe. Things like that just don't seem like they should really happen, but that happened. When I signed up for IVS, I started a really long journey from Indianapolis to Chicago to Denver to San Francisco by airplane, and then Pan Am 1 to Honolulu, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Saigon, Bangkok, and then to Laos. During that really long trip, I had a lot of time to think about, what did you just get yourself into? Because in thinking more about the Hmong and reading about them, they were semi-nomadic. They were driven out of China, maybe in the 17th or 18th century conflicts with the Han Chinese. They lived in the top of mountains in North Vietnam, North Laos, and North Thailand. They practiced swidden agriculture, which was slash and burn. You would cut down the forest, burn it. Those ashes would make the land fertile for maybe 3 years or 5 years. Then you would have to move. They were a people with no written language, and they had no formal school system until the French colonized Indochina. The French built a few Hmong schools, but because the Hmong were so isolated and so nomadic, very few Hmong went to school. So as I was traveling, I was thinking about all of this. How are those Hmong going to accept me as an English language teacher in their culture? It just didn't seem to fit. So I had a lot of apprehension as I was on my way.
Founded in 1953, the U.S. International Voluntary Service, or IVS, pioneered America's model of citizen-led international development, sending volunteers abroad to work alongside local communities and laying much of the groundwork for the creation of the Peace Corps.
But I also knew that IVS was funded by USAID, and the USAID person in Samtong province was a legend, Edgar Pop Buell. That gave me a little bit of comfort, but I was trying to think of how am I going to fit into that culture? How are they going to accept me or not accept me? I just didn't know. When I first arrived, it was really difficult. After I got to Vientiane, there was a small plane that took me to Samtong, a short takeoff landing plane with just one pilot. I was the only passenger. As we were flying to Samtong, the guy was telling me about the Hmong and his experiences. He finally pointed and said, "Look, that's Samtong, that's your new home." And this broad valley with a red laterite strip cut in the middle of it, mountains on all sides. There was, at the end of the airstrip, there was a big building. I learned later the hospital. Next to that, there was a Quonset hut, which was Pop Buell's rice warehouse. And then there was another little house that was the house for the pilots when they rested overnight. And other than that, there were just thatch huts. And over on one side of the valley, there was a school. You could see there's one big building that didn't fit with everything else. As we were landing, the pilot said, "I'm not going to glide in for a landing. I'm going to corkscrew down because there might be bad guys on these mountains that could shoot the sugar out of us." And so he literally corkscrewed down and we banged onto the airstrip. And as we did that, the radio came on. "This is Pop Buell. Jim, you got that school teacher on board?" He said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, take him down to the far end of the airstrip." So the pilot took me down there and said, "This is it. You're out." And as I got out of the plane, he said, "Remember, you're in a war zone. There's good guys and there's bad guys. And sometimes the good guys are the bad guys." And he taxied away. But there was no welcoming committee, no one from the school. Pop wasn't there. That was just me standing at the end of that airstrip with my knapsack, half a world away from anything I knew, feeling more lonely than I'd ever felt, wondering, what have you really gotten yourself into? After a really long time, I saw a Jeep pull away from the Quonset hut and drive towards me. It was Pop Buell. Pop looks at me and he says, "You're the new school teacher?" I'm not sure he knew that the school teacher was going to be a black guy. "You're the new school teacher?" "Yes, I am." He cut me off. He said, "Well, I'm Pop Buell. I run this here operation up here at the airstrip." He said, "Look way over yonder at the other side of the valley. You see those buildings? That's the school." He said, "That's where you belong. There are things that go on here in the airstrip that you don't want to see, you don't want to know about. Your job is over at the school. See that trail at your feet? That'll take you over to the school." With that, he turned his Jeep around and he left. I had no choice. All I could do is then walk down the trail and over to the school. In the middle of the valley, there was like an open air market. That was my first encounter with the Hmong. So I walked into that open air market. I was obviously looking at everything. These Hmong men in their black pajamas, all carrying machetes. Hmong women with beautifully embroidered skirts, and some of them with silver neck chains. But what struck me is not one person looked at me, smiled at me, said hello to me. They looked at me and looked away. That sent chills through me. And the open air market was something I'd never seen. There were fruits and things that I'd never seen before. Chunks of meat, bloody meat with flies. It was just, I thought maybe I've made a really bad mistake here. So I was really feeling uneasy. By the time I got to the school, there was no one at the school, just the empty buildings, no teachers, no one. So I sat there for a really long time. It seemed like an eternity. Eventually, I saw a guy walking towards me. It was Mualia. He was the education chief for Siang Quang province. I had had maybe 2 or 3 weeks of intensive Lao, 8 or 10 hours a day. So I had a little Lao, not much. Mualia had some English. So between my Lao and his English, we got along really well. He introduced me to a few of the teachers that came after him, and they settled me into a place to sleep. But I couldn't get out of my mind that reception at the airstrip and the reception at the marketplace. I didn't know what to think of the moment. Then that night, I saw what looked like flares or torches or something at the far end of the valley. And I could hear every once in a while a boom, boom. And I thought, we must be under attack. Those must be flares. But they were kind of snaking through the sky. And eventually I figured out that it must be people carrying torches going down a mountain path. It's not flares. As they got closer and closer to where I was, I could hear that there was a drum, boom. People carrying torches and chants. I didn't know what to think. What was this? And they came up the hill to the school. And then they were coming from the school towards the place I was. And all of a sudden, I thought, they must be like Ku Klux Klan. They must be coming. Maybe I did something in the market that really scared someone, or a woman aborted, or whatever happened. They were coming to exact some kind of revenge on me. And sure enough, they started circling around the hut that I was living in. Boom, boom, woo, with torches. And now they were so close that I could see their faces. I could see the sweat on their faces. I could see the coldness in their stares. And I knew that this was going to be my last minutes on earth, that they would come into that hut with those big machetes they were carrying, and they would chop me into pieces just like the meat that I had seen in the market. I didn't know what to do. I think finally I must have passed out, because the next thing I knew, I felt something on my face and I hit it a little bit, and it was sunlight coming through a crack in the wall of the bamboo hut. And I felt myself, I was in one piece. So I thought, maybe this was just a really bad dream. But when I went outside of the hut, there were footprints all around. There was the smell of kerosene from the torches. I went later to the school and I learned what the story was. One of the Hmong pilots had been shot down by the North Vietnamese and killed, died a violent death. His body had been recovered and brought back to Sam Tong. And people were mourning him. And his house or his hut must have been somewhere near mine. And they were circling his hut. It had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with the Ku Klux Klan. And I realized that I had carried a lot of baggage with me that I needed to get rid of, that baggage was going to influence how I thought about anything that was happening to me. And I needed to take everything just the way it was and not draw any conclusions. I started at the school. The school teachers accepted me. And in fact, while none of their parents, I'm sure, had any education at all, the kids that were in the teacher training school at Sam Tong, where I was teaching, already had 6 years of education. They had graduated from primary school. That's as far as you could go at that time in Laos. And they were avid learners. They were so excited about learning and having the possibility of learning English on top of everything else they were doing. They were just really excited. So they made me feel really comfortable with why I was there and what I was doing. And Hmong culture, I had no problem with that. Living with the Hmong was like living with my mother's people on the Tombigbee River in Alabama. On the Tombigbee River, the Muskogee Creek Indians, they build their house on stilts. So when the river floods, the chickens and pigs can all go up with them in their house and no one's damaged. The Hmong were the same way. The Lao lived on stilts and the Hmong had their chickens and pigs coming in and out of their house. I felt at home. I felt really at home. I didn't feel any apprehension about not speaking the language very well yet, or living in a place with no electricity, no running water, no flush toilets, no cash economy. None of that really bothered me. I was happy as a lark where I was doing what I was doing. I was teaching English, but there's only time in the curriculum for several hours a week. So I felt really underutilized. Once I was into it and people were enjoying what I was doing, I had a lot of time on my hands. So I remember from IVS training that they said, as a volunteer, you're going to be out there, you're going to have to be creative. You're going to have to find your own work. You need to do what you can do where you are with what you have. And I had been a college athlete. I had loved physical education my entire life. And I had noticed in the primary school associated with the teacher training school that when there was a break, the kids would just go out and stand in the schoolyard and talk, and then they were back in class. So I proposed to Mualia, I'd like to make some playground equipment, maybe just something simple like a rope swing tied to one of the trees and a swing for the girls. And he said, sure, that sounds fine. So I had Vientiane send up rope and plywood to make some seats for the swings. Everybody was curious. I was out with all of this stuff, climbing up a tree. No one had ever seen a swing before. But once that was in place, the kids came out and I climbed up the rope a couple of times and I sat on the swing and I swung. Boys started climbing up the rope, burning their hands at first, and I had to show them how not to burn their hands. The girls were swinging. There was laughter in the playground. Even the teachers were looking on. They had been so dubious. They seemed to say, wow, this seems like a good thing. At that time, I felt I'm really at the right place and I'm going to be able to make a contribution in some way that will help them all. So I even took this to the next step. My next project was going to invade the sanctity of the classroom. I decided that I wanted to teach kids how to build school furniture, how to build their own desks and benches and blackboards, because I had gone out to some of the rural schools where they were going to be teaching. There was nothing. You would go into this rundown little building made by a community as a community school. There was either no school furniture at all, no blackboards, or there was some crude furniture made by the villagers who had never been to a school themselves. So I taught these kids how to first draw and plan and measure, very simple mechanical drawing. I had all of the materials shipped from Vientiane, and I taught them how to then cut the plywood with the saws that were sent and with hammers and nails and everything, make simple school furniture. The idea was that when they went out to the rural school, if they were interested, I would provide the plywood and the saws and the hammers and the nails and the paint brushes and the blackboard paint. And they could start in their school by doing something that the villagers could see, that education was more than just words in a classroom, that it could do things that would change their lives for the better. So that was my last project as an education person at Sam Tong. I moved on to work on the refugee program, because one of the refugee officers had been killed by the North Vietnamese. And Pop came over to ask me if I would be, he had watched me. He had sent me to the school as a test, as he had done many other people who had come there. Was I learning Lao? Was I picking up any Hmong? How did I get along with Mualia and the teachers? And there was a hierarchy of leadership. All the government administrative offices, civilian offices were in Sam Tong. And there was another level of leadership, General Vang Pao. Long Chang was the CIA headquarters and for the secret war. It was just over the mountain from Sam Tong. And General Vang Pao had an army of maybe 30,000 Hmong volunteers, a guerrilla army, supported by the CIA with weapons and ammunition and training and some covert air support. And so he was the leader of everybody, General Wang Pao was.
The U.S. secret war in Laos lasted from 1961 to 1975. It was a covert CIA-led campaign during the Vietnam War, in which America armed Hmong fighters and carried out one of the heaviest bombing campaigns in history to block communist expansion and disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Pop made all of those checks, and they approved me, so I went up and worked on the Strip after that as a refugee relief operations officer. So I had been doing foreign aid development work, development assistance, education in the school. But now I was up working with refugees, doing another spigot of foreign aid, humanitarian aid.
We'll leave it at that for now, but join us for part 2 of Paul E. White's amazing stories from Laos. I'm Christopher Wurst, the host and creator of SoftPower FulStories. See you for part 2.